what's up? Hold on one second. Let's get Facebook rolling here. Good morning. All right, we are live on Facebook, we're live on Instagram, and welcome to those listening on the podcast. Welcome to the PT on Ice Daily Show, brought to you by the Institute of Clinical Excellence. My name is Dustin Jones. I'm one of two lead faculty members within the older adult division of ICE. And today's Wednesday, so it's Jerry on Ice. We talk about all things older adults every single Wednesday. What's up, y'all? Good morning. Wanted to talk about today's topic, which is going to be when compensation is desirable. When compensation is desirable. So a couple weeks ago, I spoke to how we can build overhead capacity in older adults and spoke about the C word, the big cuss word in the world of physical therapy, and that's compensation. Many of you all hear that word and you associate that with some type of negative outcome or something that could lead to injury, for example. I hear that, and I hear a pathway to someone being able to do the things that they want to do. So I want to speak to that a little bit more because we had some good conversations about compensation with your all's different perspectives. I just wanted to share kind of the Jerry PT perspective of someone that spent most of their careers working with individuals in their 70s, 80s, 90s that are kind of on the borderline of being independent or being able to stay in their home. So compensation, when it is desirable. A lot of the perspective of compensation, Gmo, what's up? Revolves around a theory of successful aging. So in the 90s, Baltez and a group released an article talking about a theory of successful aging, which is short for SOC. The SOC stands for selection, optimization, and compensation. Now, when you hear SOC, many of you all that may do home health, you instantly turn off. You want to get away from this video or this podcast because you think Oasis start of care in 2 hours of documentation. Completely different, all right? Hang in there with me. We're talking about selection, optimization, and compensation. So this theory of successful aging was basically a framework to help guide clinicians working with older adults, not just physical therapists, but just healthcare providers, and how to really identify goals, relevant goals for these individuals. How can we help them reach their goals in whatever way we're able to? And so it's a helpful framework, and this is something that Christine and I heavily rely on when we are working with older adults and how we're trying to serve them in the best way possible. So I'll go through these. Selection. When you hear the term selection in this theory of successful aging, what you're thinking about is identifying very important goals to that individual. All right, let me say it again. You are identifying very important and valuable goals to that particular individual. We hear this stuff all the time, but I think in the world of older adults, this is very relevant because what I may perceive as a goal or desire for them may not be a goal or desire that they have for themselves. A great example of this is Dr. Atul Gawande speaks to this in a great interview he did with Krista Tippett on Being, where he talked about our goal as a healthcare provider may be to ensure safety for someone, that we want to make sure they don't get hurt, that they don't have a fall, that we may want them to be able to deadlift a kettlebell off the ground and for them to get stronger. However, that person may just want to be able to read a book in silence. And we need to honor that, acknowledge that, and help them identify that goal, but then also get a plan to go forward. So selecting a particular goal or activity that is very desirable for them. Once we select that activity, then we want to optimize it. So this is where I think we have a very good skill set to be able to optimize people's function, to improve upon their particular deficits, to be able to achieve that selected goal that we discussed before. And so we want to optimize. We do this all the time in the clinic, working with our patients, working with our clients, is that we're getting them stronger, we're improving their mobility, we're getting them to think differently about different activities. We are really good in this realm. And then after the optimization piece, then we move to compensation. And this is where we are trying to optimize their function, but also minimize loss or decline, and leverage whatever we can to compensate, to be able for them to continue to achieve that selected goal. So we're trying to minimize loss, we're trying to minimize decline, we're trying to maintain their function or even improve their function in the face of loss and decline. And that's where compensation comes in. So this SOC, Jeff, what's up, man? This SOC framework, the ultimate goal of it is that you're trying to maximize their gains, their functional gains, but you're also trying to minimize loss. You're trying to maximize gains, but you're trying to minimize loss. We often focus on the maximize gains piece because we're really optimistic. Generally, we focus on building their capacity and getting them stronger, improving their balance and all those things, getting them out of pain. But we want to minimize their loss as well. And with older adults, we need to acknowledge that and try to address it in whatever way that we can. And so that's where compensation can be very, very helpful. So back to the topic, or the title of this podcast is when compensation is actually desirable. How can you think through this to where you know you want to compensate for someone within that SOC framework? So I'll give a couple of examples of some pretty common things, especially in geriatrics, and just how we can think about that. And I'd love your all's opinions or thoughts in the comments of this Facebook post, or if you're on Instagram, I'll leave a comment as well. So the first one, I think the very first thing that comes to a lot of our minds when we hear compensation is some type of assistive device, like a single point cane, like a walker, something along those lines where we're trying to modify their maybe environment or something that will allow them to perform that selected goal that is desirable to them. And this is very common and can be very, very helpful. However, especially in the Geros Health community and even in MMOA, the Modern Management of the Older Adult courses, we have a lot of conversations about when do we apply this compensation or assistive device or something along those lines. And the big thing that we want to emphasize is in the face of likely loss or decline, that is where this compensation can be very, very helpful. So let's take something like a lift chair. This is a very classic example, especially in the world of home health. A lift chair, you know, the big recliner that lifts people up so they can come to standing much easier, is not a bad thing in and of itself. However, in different contexts, I could say it is a bad thing for an individual. Let's take an individual that let's say they don't have a support system. They have a very difficult time getting out of their current recliner, and it is very, very obvious that they are facing imminent loss and decline in their functional ability, in their ability to perform that transfer independently. If they don't have a support system, if they're at home, let's say if they're in a rural area, for example, that situation could be rather urgent to where we may want something like a lift chair. As we're trying to optimize on their current capacity, we're trying to improve their transfer ability, we're trying to really push them towards independence, but compensation can minimize the potential loss, and that could be a good thing. All right, that could be a good thing for that individual. Now let's take another patient that may be, in the home, has a solid support system. They have a pretty decent transfer capacity. They're doing a sit to stand pretty well. They have decent quad strength. Their mechanics are pretty solid. They're able to do that transfer pretty well. There's no imminent loss of decline or independence that you're able to perceive, but they just don't like to do it. It requires a lot of perceived or relative effort, and it's just so much easier for them to get a lift chair, to be able to get up out of that chair. I could argue in that particular situation, that compensation of a lift chair would not be a good thing, that could continue the functional decline of that individual, that we want to build in some of that practice with sit to stands and transfers to build up their capacity to where a lift chair would probably not serve them well. Same compensation or assistive device, the lift chair, but different scenarios, and it can be viewed as a good thing or a bad thing. That's how we want to think about these assistive devices. In the face of imminent loss and decline, compensation can be helpful. And we have to, it's difficult because, if you haven't spent a lot of time around older adults, you're not able to see kind of the trajectory for a lot of individuals in different settings or scenarios. That can be difficult to make that call. But the more time you spend around folks, you start to pick up on that. You start to see, okay, this person, I am making an informed opinion that there's likely going to be a functional decline very shortly if we don't try and intervene here. And that comes with time. So assistive devices, whether it's cane, walkers, whatnot. I use the lift chair example. A power wheelchair or power chair is another one. The scooter, that's another classic example where it could be good, it could be bad for the individual as well. So we want to minimize loss and decline. The second thing, and this is what I spoke to a couple weeks ago, is compensation in the presence of a particular activity, movement, when we're talking about biomechanics. And I mentioned the example of trying to get someone overhead. Compensation can be very helpful in this regard in the face of imminent loss and decline, especially of function. So in those particular scenarios, let's say that first individual that is independent at home, that doesn't have much of a support system, that has to be able to get their head up to a cupboard, to be able to put their dishes up, to be able to grab something in their pantry, whatever it may be. If that is a very important skill that they need to have, I don't care how they do it as long as they do it. Because if they're not able to do that, that could threaten their ability to be in their home, to be independent, to have that quality of life that they want to have. So that is where we may actually train someone to do a trunk lean to help them elevate their arm a little bit higher. We may work on having them elevate their shoulder as they're getting up on their toes to raise their relative height so they can reach that particular area. It is not as efficient if I were to do nice isolated shoulder flexion or even working on straight pressing, but they may not have that range of motion, and the likelihood of them getting that range of motion may be very slim to none. So I'm going to teach them how to lean, how to get up on their toes so they can get their arm up to be able to perform that activity that's valuable to them. That's where compensation can be very, very helpful. Now, many of y'all may be thinking, okay, Dustin, that's great. You're going to get them to compensate and perform that inefficient movement pattern so they can perform this activity. What about the risk of injury? Aren't you concerned about that? Yes, I am concerned about injury. However, you can be very thoughtful in your compensatory movement patterns to be able to build their capacity to where they're just more resilient individuals. You can add progressive load to quote-unquote inefficient movement patterns to build their capacity in that so they can handle what daily life throws at them and to be able to handle that particular activity. So with that example, coming up on their toes, leaning, trying to get their hand up, we may progressively overload that movement to where when they perform that particular activity in their daily life, that's only at, let's say, 30% of their max capacity. So whether that's adding load with actual weights and resistance, or just increasing their volume and doing more reps of that particular movement in a progressive nature to where they're able to adapt and build resilience, that is perfectly fine. And so for a lot of us, and especially I think the outpatient clinicians, we need to have that perspective of what is important to these individuals, what are their particular goals, and then to see how their pain or their limitations in function actually impact their quality of life and their independence. Because you often don't perceive that when someone is walking to you in your clinic. You folks that do home visits or do home health, you have a very clear idea of this and you have a great perspective and you can address that as well. But the outpatient folks, you have to work a little harder and kind of expand your perspective beyond the four walls of your clinic. And I think that's where this theory of successful aging can be very, very helpful to know when to apply compensation. All right, so something like changing the environment, assistive devices can be helpful. Also, the mechanics of a particular movement. If you're trying to incorporate compensation to allow them to be successful in that movement, to be independent, to have the ability to do the things that they want to do in the home is a great thing. And the beautiful thing is you can build their tolerance and their capacity within that quote-unquote inefficient movement pattern to where they can handle it and they're not going to get hurt and they're going to be able to do the things that they want to do. So that is how I like to think about compensation. Remember that successful aging theory, SOC, selection, optimization, compensation. Remember, we're just trying to maximize their gains. We want to minimize loss. We want to maximize gains, but we also want to minimize loss. We have to look at both sides of that equation, and then our interventions will follow suit. So that's all I got. If you have any questions, thoughts, disagreements, hit me up, whether it's on Facebook, in the Facebook video, whether it's on Instagram, in the comments there. If you're listening on the podcast, hop on social media and engage with these videos. We go live every single day at 9 a.m., Monday through Friday. I'd love to hear your all's feedback. As we wrap up, I do want to remind you all that it's Wednesday. I said that before, but that means it's also the day that you all get the Hump Day Hustle email. So every Wednesday morning at 8:30 a.m., Jeff Moore asks the faculty, what helpful research articles, what blog posts have you come across this week, or podcast, or whatever it may be that's helped us in our practice, share it. And then he curates that in a very lovely, succinct email and ships it to you all at 8:30 a.m. every Wednesday. If you're not on that, I encourage you to do so. Just go to ptonice.com, hit Hump Day Hustle, it's a tab, or just go to the bottom of any page, put your email in there, and you will get the goods every Wednesday. All right, it was good chatting with y'all. Y'all have a lovely Wednesday. I will talk with y'all soon. See ya.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the PT on Ice Daily Show. If you enjoyed this content, head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. And be sure to check us out on Facebook and Instagram at the Institute of Clinical Excellence. If you're interested in getting plugged into more ICE content on a weekly basis while earning CEUs from home, check out our virtual ICE online mentorship program at ptonice.com. While you're there, sign up for our Hump Day Hustling newsletter for a free email every Wednesday morning with our top 5 research articles and social media posts that we think are worth reading. Head over to ptonice.com and scroll to the bottom of the page to sign up.